My name is Diana Thornton. I'm 34 years old. And the day I got the keys to my first house, my mother's voice went so cold you would have thought I had stolen something from her. I was standing in my empty kitchen on Lehman Street, holding those keys, still warm from my own hand, when my phone lit up with 11 missed calls from my parents. 11. Not 1. Not 2. 11, stacked on top of each other like something was on fire. At first I thought they were hurt that I hadn't told them sooner. I thought my mom wanted to cry happy tears and my dad wanted to check the water heater, the way he checks every water heater in a 15-mile radius like it's his job. I was wrong about all of it. 3 weeks later, an 8-year-old told me the truth at a kitchen counter, swinging her feet off a stool, talking about bedrooms like she was reading off a grocery list. And what my family did after that made losing my spare key look like a warm-up. Because my parents weren't angry about what I bought. They were angry about what my sister was supposed to do with it. Stay with me, because before I tell you what happened in that driveway with a U-Haul and a locksmith and an $85,000 secret, you need to understand exactly who I was in this family, because you can't understand the crime unless you understand the setup first. And I promise you, the setup took 22 years to build. If you've ever been the one everybody leans on, the fixer, the calm one, the one who just understands, this story is going to feel uncomfortably familiar. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight. And make sure you're subscribed to Behind the Closed Door Revenge, because the ending of this one is worth staying for. I mean that. Stay to the very end. Let me back up, because you need the full shape of this family before the U-Haul makes any sense. I'm a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm in Dayton, Ohio. 12 years at the same office, same cubicle for the first 8 of them, same coffee mug with a chip on the handle that I never replaced because replacing things felt like admitting I deserved better ones. 9 of those 12 years I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, where every Tuesday smelled like other people's fabric softener and the dryers thumped through the floor like a second heartbeat. I made my coffee at home. I drove a car with a hand crank window that stuck in July. I put money away every single month, quietly, the way some people pray, not because I expected an answer, but because the ritual itself kept me steady. In my family, I was the one who handles things. I did my parents' taxes every spring, free, always free. I did my Aunt Sharon's taxes. When my grandmother needed help filling out a Medicare form, the phone rang and it was for me. When anyone in that family got a letter with a government seal stamped on the envelope, that letter ended up on my kitchen table within 24 hours, like mail had a homing instinct for my address. My sister Rachel used to joke that I was the family's free accountant, free notary, and free therapist, all in one exhausted package. Everyone would laugh, and I would laugh too, because that's what I did. I laughed, and then I handled it. Here's the thing nobody tells you about being the reliable one in a family like mine: reliable isn't a compliment. It's a job assignment. There's no raise, no vacation days, and absolutely no quitting. You get hired at around 12 years old, and you find out about the retirement policy the hard way, usually the day you try to have a life of your own and discover the position doesn't come with an exit clause. For most of my life, I thought that job was the same thing as being loved. I balanced everyone's books, literally and emotionally, and told myself the numbers proved I belonged. I want you to really sit with that, because I think a lot of people watching this know exactly what I mean. Standing in that empty kitchen with 11 missed calls blinking on my screen, I had no idea my job description was about to expand. Reliable, it turns out, came with housing duties. I just hadn't read that part of the contract yet. Nobody had shown it to me. They'd only shown it to each other. There's a particular kind of loneliness in being essential to people who've never once asked what you need. I used to think that loneliness was just what responsibility felt like. It took me 34 years and 1 stolen spare key to learn the difference. Here's the layout of the pressure cooker my family was living in, because it matters for everything that comes after. My parents, Carol and Frank Thornton, own a 3-bedroom house on Warner Avenue, about 15 minutes from my new place. My dad is 66, a retired machinist who barely talks unless something in the house is broken, in which case he'll talk to the broken thing directly, quietly, like it can hear him and feel ashamed. My mom is 63 and works part-time at the front office of First Methodist Church, which in our town is less a job title and more a throne with a coffee maker next to it. 2 years before any of this started, my sister Rachel's husband Mark lost his heating and cooling business. He'd run it himself for 6 years, steady work, steady growth, the kind of American small business story that's supposed to end well. Then suppliers got expensive. 2 big commercial clients stiffed him on invoices that should have kept the lights on through winter. It came down slowly, and then all at once, the way these things do. 18 months before I bought my house, Rachel, Mark, and their 3 kids moved into my parents' place on Warner Avenue. Rachel is 31. The kids are Ava, who's 8, Cody, who's 6, and June, who's 3. That's 7 people under one roof built comfortably for 4. I watched it wear on all of them, and I never said a word against it out loud. I bought the kids' school supplies every August and didn't make a thing of it. I paid for Ava's summer camp and told Rachel it was a promotional gift card, which is not a real thing, but she didn't check, because why would she check a gift? I showed up with groceries and called it just passing by, even though Warner Avenue is nowhere near anything I pass by. I did what I always did. I handled the edges of it quietly so nobody would have to ask me for anything directly. But that fall, my mother started asking me a strange question. She'd wait until we were alone, drying dishes side by side at her sink, and she'd say it casually, like she was commenting on the weather. "Have you looked at anything bigger, honey?" Bigger. I was living alone above a laundromat with a car that had a hand crank window. I remember thinking it was a funny word for her to keep landing on. It wasn't funny. It was a measurement. She was measuring me for something, and I didn't yet know what. I want to tell you about the babysitting box, because everything that happened this year started there, 22 years ago, in a kitchen with the exact same smell of pot roast that would come back to haunt me decades later. When I was 12, I babysat for 2 families on our street. $5 an hour, which felt, at the time, like an actual fortune. I kept the money in a shoebox in my closet, tucked under a folded sweater, and I was saving toward a blue 10-speed bike sitting in the window of the hardware store downtown. I counted that money the way other kids reread comic books, reverently, repeatedly, like the act of counting made it more real. One Saturday in March, the water heater on Warner Avenue died the same week my dad's hours got cut at the plant. I came home from school on Monday, and the shoebox was light. Nobody had asked me. My mother sat me down at the kitchen table, put her hand over mine, and explained, gently, that families pull together, and that she knew I understood. Then she turned to my dad and my aunt, sitting at that same table, and said the sentence that quietly built the next 22 years of my life. "Diana understands. Diana always understands." And everyone smiled at me. I remember exactly how that smile felt to receive. It felt like being chosen. It felt like a trophy with my name engraved on it, even though there was no actual trophy, just a warm room and a bunch of adults looking at a 12-year-old like she'd passed some invisible test. So I smiled back, and I said, the water heater was more important. And I never got the bike. And I learned the deal my family was quietly offering everyone at that table: understanding was the price of admission. Handling things was how you paid your dues to stay inside the circle. I spent the next 22 years being the girl who understands. I understood at 16. I understood at 25. I understood at 30. I understood until understanding was the only thing anyone in that family thought I was actually for. The house on Lehman Street was the first thing in my entire adult life I ever refused to hand over before someone even asked for it. And my family treated that refusal like a crime scene. I bought my house in secret, and I want to be completely honest with you about why, because the reason isn't dramatic. It's small, and it's exactly the kind of small thing that explains everything bigger. 3 years before all of this, I bought a car, a sensible used sedan, arguably the most boring purchase available in the entire United States of America. I made the mistake of mentioning it out loud at Sunday dinner before I'd signed anything. My family turned it into a committee meeting on the spot. My dad had strong opinions about transmissions he'd never seen. Aunt Sharon knew a guy. My mother wanted me to wait until spring, for reasons that were never explained and, apparently, never needed to be explained to anyone but me. By the end of that dinner, I was so worn down I nearly bought the car my mother liked, in a color I actively disliked, just to make the noise stop. So when I started house hunting the following winter, I told absolutely no one. And the longer I looked, the stranger my mother's hints got. She kept circling back to one specific listing, a 4-bedroom colonial on Maple Street. Good school district, she'd say, apropos of nothing. A house like that holds its value. Room to grow. I hadn't told her I was looking. I remember a cold little feeling settle under my ribs every single time Maple Street came up in conversation, the way you feel hearing your own name mentioned in a room you're not standing in. I didn't have a word for that feeling yet. I just knew, with total clarity, that I wanted a door that locked and a deed with exactly one name on it. In February, I found the cottage on Lehnan Street. 2 bedrooms. A porch with a crooked step. A blue ceramic dish the previous owners had left sitting by the toaster, like a small gift to whoever came next. $285,000. I put down $57,000, 20%, 12 years of my working life compressed into a single wire transfer. My realtor asked, almost as an afterthought, if my family wanted a walkthrough before closing. I told her, my family walks through things by voting on them. 40 minutes of paperwork to buy a house would take my family 4 months to make me regret the pen. Closing day was the first Friday in March. I signed. I shook hands with people I'll never see again. I drove straight to Lehnan Street and stood in my own kitchen with my own keys in my own hand, and I did something I'd been quietly imagining for months. I texted a photo of those keys to the family group chat with one line, surprise. I bought a house. Then I set the phone face down on the counter and just breathed for a minute, alone, in a house that smelled like fresh paint and possibility. When I picked the phone back up, there were 11 missed calls. My parents' landline. My mother's cell. My mother's cell again. My mother's cell a third time. Not one single text saying congratulations. Nothing at all from Rachel. I called back, standing in that empty kitchen, and my mother answered before the first ring even finished. There was a silence long enough that I actually said hello, twice into it. Then my mother said, "You did this without consulting us." Not "Where is it?" Not "How much?" Not "Are you happy, sweetheart?" Consulting, like I'd sold off a piece of a family company out from under its own board of directors. I laughed, honestly, because I assumed she had to be halfway joking. "Mom, I'm 34. It's a 2-bedroom cottage, not a merger." My dad was on speaker, and I could hear him breathing without saying anything, which is his native language in moments like these. My mother's voice didn't rise. It got lower, and very, very calm, and anyone who has ever met a member of my family can tell you that particular calm is the actual danger sign, the one that precedes weather, not the one that means the storm has passed. "You have no idea what you've done," she said. And then she hung up on me. I stood there holding the phone in a house that still smelled like someone else's fresh paint job. Here's what I knew about my mother's anger after 34 years of close, careful study. It had shapes. Hurt had one shape. Worry had another. This was neither of those. This was the shape of something breaking that I simply couldn't see yet. A plan, as it turned out. Their plan. By Sunday, the phone tree had bloomed in full. If you've ever lived in a small church-adjacent town in the Midwest, you already know exactly what I mean by that phrase. Aunt Sharon texted first, "Call your mother. She is devastated." Devastated. About a cottage. Then my mother's cousin called to inform me that family is the only thing we take with us, which was rich, considering that same cousin once sued her own brother over a riding lawnmower and didn't speak to him for 4 Thanksgivings. Then 2 ladies from First Methodist sent me nearly identical messages about how blessed I was, and how blessings were meant to be shared. I want you to notice something I only noticed later, lying awake at 2 in the morning turning all of this over. Nearly identical. The same phrases kept arriving from completely different mouths. Shared blessings. Family sticks together. Your poor mother. When 5 separate people call you selfish using the exact same words, somebody wrote those words. At the time, I just felt like I was losing my mind. I'd bought a house with my own money, in my own town, 15 minutes from my parents, and my family was reacting like I'd fled the country under a fake name with the family silver. But the message that actually kept me up that whole week wasn't from an aunt, and it wasn't from a cousin. It was from my sister. Rachel had said absolutely nothing for 2 full days. No congratulations, no exclamation points, none of her usual 12 emojis stacked on top of each other the way she always does. Then, Sunday night, my phone buzzed once. So that's it then. That's all she wrote. I read it maybe 30 times. It was the voice of someone standing at the end of something, watching a door swing shut in slow motion. But I hadn't closed a door. I'd opened my first one. I typed back, "What does that mean?" and watched 3 dots appear and disappear, like someone pacing behind frosted glass. No answer ever came that night. Everyone in my family, it seemed, was grieving the exact same loss at the exact same funeral. And I was the only one who hadn't yet seen the body. 3 weeks after closing, my mother summoned me to Sunday dinner on Warner Avenue. Summoned is the correct word, the text read like a court date, not an invitation. I went anyway, because 22 years of training doesn't dissolve in 14 days, no matter how proud of your new deadbolt you are. Dinner was pot roast and a kind of politeness so thick you could have spread it on the bread. My dad talked about the weather twice, unprompted. Rachel wouldn't hold my eyes at all. She kept cutting June's food into smaller and smaller pieces, long after June had stopped eating entirely, just to have something to do with her hands. Mark kept repeating that the roast was great, which was more sustained conversation than he usually managed in that dining room. Every conversation at that table kept dying in the middle, like the whole room was waiting on a cue nobody was willing to give first. So that's it then. That's all she wrote. I read it maybe 30 times. It was the voice of someone standing at the end of something, watching a door swing shut in slow motion. But I hadn't closed a door. I'd opened my first one. I typed back, "What does that mean?" and watched 3 dots appear and disappear, like someone pacing behind frosted glass. No answer ever came that night. Everyone in my family, it seemed, was grieving the exact same loss at the exact same funeral. And I was the only one who hadn't yet seen the body. 3 weeks after closing, my mother summoned me to Sunday dinner on Warner Avenue. Summoned is the correct word, the text read like a court date, not an invitation. I went anyway, because 22 years of training doesn't dissolve in 14 days, no matter how proud of your new deadbolt you are. Dinner was pot roast and a kind of politeness so thick you could have spread it on the bread. My dad talked about the weather twice, unprompted. Rachel wouldn't hold my eyes at all. She kept cutting June's food into smaller and smaller pieces, long after June had stopped eating entirely, just to have something to do with her hands. Mark kept repeating that the roast was great, which was more sustained conversation than he usually managed in that dining room. Every conversation at that table kept dying in the middle, like the whole room was waiting on a cue nobody was willing to give first. Then, over dessert, my mother set down her fork and said, to no one in particular, "The 4-bedroom on Maple is still available, you know. Good school district." The room went quiet in a very specific way. Not a surprised quiet. A caught quiet. I looked up. "How do you know what's available, Mom?" She smoothed the tablecloth with one hand. "People mention things. Here's what you need to understand. I had never, not once, told my mother I was house hunting. Not the Maple Street listing, not any listing at all. And yet she knew that exact house was still available. Still, as in, someone had been actively tracking it for months. Rachel stared into her coffee like it owed her money. My dad got very busy with his napkin. And then Ava, my 8-year-old niece, looked up from her ice cream with the pure administrative confidence unique to third graders and asked, "Aunt Di, is your new house the one we're?" Ava. Rachel's voice cut in, fast and sharp as a mousetrap snapping shut. Just her name. Ava stopped mid-sentence. The table restarted loudly, all at once, about absolutely nothing. And I sat there with my spoon in the air, finally certain of exactly one thing: everyone at that table knew something about my own life that I did not. "You were never supposed to hear it from Ava," she said. And then it all came out, smooth as a rehearsed speech, because it was one. The plan: I buy the 4-bedroom on Maple, the house she'd been quietly steering me toward for months. Rachel, Mark, and the kids move in with me. A few years, that's all. Family helping family. Everyone had discussed it. Everyone had agreed to it. Everyone but me. I stood in my parents' living room and heard my own future described entirely in the past tense. And when I finally asked, "Why would you plan my life without asking me?" my mother looked genuinely, sincerely puzzled by the question. "What's yours is the family's, Diana. That's what family means." I said no in my parents' living room, and I want to tell you exactly how, because I'd rehearsed versions of that word my entire life and never once spent one. I didn't yell. I didn't recite 22 years of grievances like a legal brief. I said, "No. I'm sorry this plan existed without me in it." But no. For a second, nobody in that room moved a muscle. I don't think a single person there had ever heard that word come out of my mouth without a cushion wrapped around it. Then my mother recovered the way a chess player recovers, by immediately moving the next piece. "Fine," she said. "Then sell it. The Maple house is still on the market. Buy it, and we'll help you look this time. We'll help you look this time." That sentence told me everything I needed to know about how she saw the last 12 years of my life. My cottage wasn't my home in her eyes. It was a clerical error, the wrong box checked on some family form, and the family was generously offering to help me correct my own mistake. "My house is not a mistake," I said. "It's not for sale, and it's not available." Rachel finally spoke, quiet, from the couch. "You have 2 bedrooms, Dee. We have 3 kids." As if the math itself were the argument, as if the only actual problem with taking my house from me was that it might turn out to be a little too small for the job. Nobody in that entire room ever asked the one simple, human question I kept waiting for. "Do you want to live with 5 other people, Diana?" Nobody asked, because my own wanting had never once been a line item in this family's budget. I picked up my coat and my keys and I left. Driving back to Lehnan Street, I actually felt lighter, because I genuinely believed I had just ended something. I thought no was the end of a sentence. In my family, it turned out to be the opening line of a campaign. The campaign began politely, the way absolutely everything in my family begins. The first week of April, Aunt Sharon appeared on my porch holding a chicken casserole and a prepared speech. She toured my cottage saying cozy the way some people say condemned. Then she sat at my kitchen table and explained, warmly, that family takes care of family, that my grandmother's generation shared everything without complaint, and that she just knew I'd do the right thing once the shock wore off. The shock. Mine, apparently. The shock of behaving selfishly. She was only the first of many. Over the following 3 weeks I collected 2 more casseroles, 1 lasagna, an entire bundt cake, and a rotating cast of visitors who all seemed to be reading from the exact same script. A church friend of my mother's texted that she was praying for me to soften my heart. My mother's cousin, the lawnmower litigant, left a rambling voicemail about how houses are temporary, but family is eternal, which, as a licensed accountant, I can tell you is precisely backwards. That house had a 30-year mortgage attached to it. My family, meanwhile, was treating me like a foreclosure notice with legs. Here's the detail that really got under my skin: the one I want you to sit with for a second. Not one single person in that entire parade of visitors asked me a genuine question about my own life. Not what the house was like to live in. Not whether I was happy. Not why a woman who had saved for 12 straight years might want a door that belonged to no one but her. Every single conversation started at my obligation and ended at my selfishness, as if my actual self was just a hallway they were walking through to get between those two rooms. I stayed polite. I froze the casseroles. I said I hear you so many times the words stopped sounding like language at all. But at night, I kept turning over the same cold thought: the aunts, the cousins, the church ladies, they were all using the same phrases, in the same order. Somebody had written that script. And I already knew her handwriting. In the middle of all that pressure, I almost surrendered completely. I want to be honest about it, because this part matters more than almost anything else in this story. Mid-April, I drove to Warner Avenue to drop off a raincoat June had left in my car. I let myself in through the kitchen like always, and I stood there for a minute, unnoticed, just looking. There was an air mattress leaning against the living room wall, folded up like a bad secret nobody wanted to name. Cody's sneakers were lined up on the stairs, because there was no floor space left in the boys' room. Through a doorway I could see June's crib mattress wedged in beside my parents' bed. Rachel was at the stove stirring something, and my sister is 31 years old, but from this side, in that particular kitchen light, she looked 50. My mother stood at the sink with her back to me, and I remember thinking, when did my mother's back start curving like that? Nobody was performing for me. Nobody even knew I was standing there. It was just their actual, unedited life. 7 people breathing the same tired air in a house built for 4, and it was hard to watch. I am not made of stone. I stood in the kitchen I grew up in and felt the old machinery start up in my chest again, the gears of the girl who understands, turning over one more time out of pure muscle memory. I actually took out my phone. I had my realtor's number already pulled up on the screen. One call. Was the Maple House still available? How fast could I sell? My thumb hovered over the green button. And then a different part of my brain, the accountant, thank God for her, asked one quiet, stubborn question. Wait. Why is my house the only option anyone in this family has ever discussed? 7 people, an entire town, an entire economy of other choices, rentals, assistance programs, Mark's own brother in Columbus, and the family had run every single road through me, and only me. I put the phone away. But my thumb remembered exactly how close it had come. So I did what I do. I built a plan. If the actual problem was housing, then housing has solutions, and I am very, very good at solutions. I spent a full weekend on it. I found 6 rental listings inside Ava's school district, 3 of them full 3 bedrooms. I built Rachel and Mark a real budget spreadsheet, actual numbers, exactly what they'd need monthly, exactly where the gaps sat. I looked up a nonprofit that helps families rebuild after a small business failure, and I offered money, not vague, someday money, but specific money, application fees for every single apartment, plus real help toward a deposit. I printed all of it, put it in a folder, and brought it to Rachel at my parents' house on a Tuesday evening, genuinely believing, God help me, that I was walking in with good news. Rachel opened the folder and I watched her face change as she turned each page, and it was not relief. She looked at my printouts the way you'd look at a summons. A spreadsheet, she said. You made us a spreadsheet. It's a plan, R.A. It's 6 actual apartments. We don't need a spreadsheet, D. Her voice cracked in the middle. We need family. And there it was. The entire war, compressed into one short sentence, even though it would take me another 2 full months to understand it completely. I was offering to solve a problem. But the problem was never actually the ask. I was the ask. My house, my roof, me, folded back into the household, absorbed back into us. That was the real plan, and a stack of clean apartment listings was me quietly refusing that plan while wearing a helpful costume over the refusal. Mark came in halfway through, looked at the folder, looked at me, and walked back out of the room without saying a single word. At the time, I read that silence as pure contempt. I was wrong about that, and it's one of the very few things in this entire story I'm genuinely glad I was wrong about. The Saturday after the spreadsheet went nowhere, my dad showed up alone at the cottage. No call ahead, no warning. I looked out the window and there was Frank Thornton's gray truck parked at the curb, and my dad on my porch with his toolbox, already frowning at the crooked step like it had personally said something disrespectful about my mother. "This step's going to drop somebody," he said. That was the entire greeting. He didn't mention the house on Maple Street. He didn't mention Rachel, or the war we were quietly fighting. He just fixed the step, pulled the old board, cut a new one, set each nail with 2 clean, economical strikes, while I sat on the porch rail with a cup of coffee and handed him tools before he even asked for them, which is the one language the two of us have always spoken fluently together. When he finished, he packed up the toolbox, squared it neatly in one hand, and stood there for a second looking out at the yard. Then my dad, a man who volunteers roughly nothing, ever, about his own feelings, said, "Your mother's not wrong about everything, kiddo. She's just carrying more than she shows." "Carrying what, Dad?" I watched him almost say it. I have replayed that exact moment more times than I can count. His mouth opened. His jaw shifted, once. The truth got as far as the back of his teeth. Then he tapped the new step once with the toe of his boot and said, "Keep paint on that." And he drove home. I stood on my own solid, level, honest porch step and understood exactly one thing with total certainty. There was a number somewhere in my parents' life that nobody had ever given me, and my mother was quietly doing all the math around it, alone, in the dark. I'd find that number in June, inside a cardboard box. If you're watching this and you've ever had a parent apologize for another parent using a toolbox instead of actual words, tell me about it in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and this particular detail resonates with more people than you'd think. In early May, I did something my therapist would probably have charged me extra to hear about. I threw a housewarming party and invited the entire family. Olive branch, white flag, call it whatever you want to call it. I cleaned for 2 full days. I made my grandmother's lemon bars from the recipe card in her own looping handwriting. And they came, all of them. My parents, Rachel and Mark, and all 3 kids, Aunt Sharon, and 2 church ladies conducting what I can only describe as 3 hours of friendly reconnaissance. It almost worked. Ava claimed the window seat in my little home office and read an entire chapter out loud to June. My dad walked the basement with a flashlight and pronounced my furnace better than it deserves to be, which, from Frank Thornton, is essentially a love sonnet. My mother was careful and correct, complimenting my curtains the way you'd compliment a rival's new haircut, technically kind, unmistakably cold underneath. Here's the detail I need you to hold on to, because it matters enormously later. By my toaster sits a small blue ceramic dish the previous owners left behind. I liked it, so I kept it, and that's where I kept my spare house key. It sat there, in plain sight, for the entire 3-hour party, while people moved in and out of my kitchen refilling drinks, cutting lemon bars, admiring the window over the sink. The party ended around 6. Hugs at the door, leftovers wrapped in foil, taillights disappearing down Lehman Street. I washed the dishes, dried them, put the kettle on for myself, and then I stopped cold. The blue dish was empty. I stood there with the dish towel still over my shoulder, telling myself it had fallen, gotten moved, that some kid had been playing with it. I searched the counter, the junk drawer, the floor, the trash bag by the back door, coat pockets I hadn't worn since March. It was 10 o'clock before I finally let myself sit down and think the actual thought sitting underneath all of it. Nobody had broken into my house that night. Somebody had simply made sure they would never have to. I want to be very careful about what I say next, because I never found out for certain whose pocket my key left in, and I have decided, deliberately, that I don't want to know. Here's what I did instead of accusing a single person. Monday morning, I called a locksmith. By Wednesday, both doors had new locks, and the back door had a deadbolt that could stop a grudge cold in its tracks. I didn't announce it. I didn't send a pointed text to the family group chat. I just quietly made my house mine again, because a new lock isn't an argument. It's a fact. And I deal in facts for a living. The locksmith was a cheerful guy who talked about his fantasy football league the entire time he worked. When he finished, he said the thing they always say. You'd be surprised who has keys to people's houses. I told him I was past being surprised by anything. That night was the actual low point of my whole spring, and I'll tell you exactly why. It wasn't fear. I sat on my kitchen floor, actually on the floor, back against the cabinets, like a teenager, holding my new keys on their little paper tag, and I cried for the first time since closing day. It had nothing to do with burglars. It was about the direction the lock was pointing. 34 years old, and I was installing hardware against my own family. Every clean tooth on those new keys said the same quiet thing: you were right not to trust them. And being right, in that particular moment, felt exactly like swallowing a stone. The blue dish stayed on the counter, empty. I could have put it away. I left it there on purpose, the way you leave a scar visible. Some part of me already knew that key was going to come back into the story. I just didn't yet know it would arrive holding a moving truck. Now I have to tell you about the box, because this is exactly where the story stops being about a house. Every year since I got my accountant's license, I have done my parents' taxes. Every February, my mother hands over a shoebox of receipts like a queen granting a royal charter. Except this year. This year we were at war, so in February my mother informed me, through my father, that they would manage it themselves. April came and went. They filed an extension, which I only know because my dad muttered it at the housewarming like a man quietly reporting a crop failure. Then, one evening in the middle of June, Frank Thornton's gray truck pulled up to my cottage again, and my dad carried a cardboard box up my newly repaired porch step and set it on my kitchen table. Your mother can't face the box, he said. Don't tell her I brought it. He didn't stay. I made tea and started sorting, and honestly, it was soothing work. Receipts, pension statements, the familiar shape of my parents' modest, careful life laid out in neat little stacks across my table. And then I picked up one particular form, and the whole evening went quiet. It was a 1098, the form a lender sends you showing mortgage interest paid over the year. Except my parents paid off Warner Avenue in full 10 years earlier. I was at the barbecue. There was a cake shaped like a house. I read it again. A home equity line of credit, secured against Warner Avenue, opened a little over 2 years earlier. Outstanding balance, $85,000. I sat there with the form in my hand while my tea went completely cold, doing the one piece of math I had never once thought to do. My parents' house, the single thing they owned free and clear, the one asset in the entire family with no strings attached to it, wasn't free and clear anymore. And the date on that loan lined up with something. With someone. I called my dad the next morning and said, 6 o'clock. My porch. Just you. He came. He sat on the top step, the one he'd fixed himself, forearms resting on his knees, and I set the 1098 down beside him. He looked at it the way you look at weather rolling in from the west. Then he told me everything, in that flat machinist's voice of his, sanding each sentence smooth before he handed it over to me. 2 years earlier, Mark's business was dying, not dead yet, dying, that awful in-between stage where money can still theoretically save it. Rachel came to Warner Avenue crying about losing their house. And my mother, who had watched her own family lose a farm when she was a girl, quietly decided that would not happen to her daughter. So my parents took out an $85,000 line of credit against a house they had already paid off in full, and poured every dollar of it into Mark's company. The company died anyway. And it took Rachel's house down with it. Now the payment on that loan was coming directly out of a machinist's pension and Social Security every single month, and it was winning that fight. The plan, my dad said, was the way out. You in a bigger place with Rachel's crew, us selling Warner, paying off the loan, getting one of those condos by the church. He rubbed his thumb along the stepboard he'd built with his own hands. It all worked, Di. On paper, it all worked. Every road in this entire family had run through me. And now, finally, I understood exactly why. I was the only bridge still standing. I asked him the only question that was left. Why didn't anybody just ask me? My dad was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Your mother gave up nursing school to raise her brothers." Nobody asked her either, My mother found out I knew within a week, because Warner Avenue has thin walls and my parents have been married 40 years. She didn't call me. She showed up at my office, of all places, on a Thursday at lunch, and asked the receptionist for me like she was picking up a prescription. We sat in the little conference room with the genuinely terrible coffee, and I watched my proud, upright, church office mother decide to stop fighting me with ants and casseroles, and try, for the first time in my entire life, the one weapon she had never once used on me, the plain truth, aimed carefully. "So now you know," she said. "He doesn't know another way." He stood, tapped the step once with his boot, and drove home to his own mortgaged house. For everybody. I looked at my mother across that laminate table, and for the first time in this entire war, she looked genuinely old to me. 63 years of holding up other people's ceilings with her own spine, and the spine was tired. Some part of me had waited my entire life to be needed this completely. That's the ugly little truth at the center of being the reliable one. The wound wants the job back. My hand actually itched for a pen. I said, as quietly as I could manage, "Mom, I can't be the plan. I can help. But I can't be the plan." She gathered her purse like it was a verdict, and left. That night my phone buzzed. The family group chat. A screenshot from Rachel, a U-Haul reservation, booked for Saturday. To this day I don't know if that screenshot was a genuine mistake or a warning shot. Rachel swears it was an accident. Ava, who is incapable of dishonesty, swears her mom was crying while she typed it. Make of that whatever you'd like. Either way, Saturday came, and I did something that surprised even me. I went to work. Extension season at an accounting firm doesn't take weekends off, and I sat at my desk running other people's numbers, because some stubborn, hopeful animal in my chest still refused to fully believe my own family would actually go through with it. At 11:40, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Alvarez, my next-door neighbor, 71 years old, a retired schoolteacher, and the sharpest set of eyes on all of Lehman Street. "Diana, honey," she said, in exactly the voice you'd use for "there's smoke coming from your kitchen, there is a moving truck in your driveway." I asked her to describe exactly what she was seeing, and she did, like the professional witness she was clearly born to be. A U-Haul backed into my driveway. A man carrying boxes up onto my porch. Children on my lawn. A woman standing at my front door, trying a key that would not turn. Trying it again. Stepping back to look at the door itself, like the door had personally betrayed her. My sister, standing on my own welcome mat, holding the key from the blue ceramic dish, discovering, 6 weeks too late, that the locks on my house no longer matched the plan for my house. "Should I call someone?" Mrs. Alvarez asked. "You just did," I said. "I'm on my way." The drive from my office to Lehman Street takes about 20 minutes, and I want to tell you what those 20 minutes actually felt like, because it wasn't what you'd expect. No shaking hands. No racing heart. I drove the speed limit the entire way, calmer than I had been in 4 solid months. The calmest I have ever been in my life was the exact day I probably should have been screaming, because somewhere between 2 exits on Route 4, the last soft, hopeful thing in me finally, quietly finished dying. And what's left after that dies turns out to be very, very steady. Here's the scene I pulled up to, and the scene half my street had pulled back their curtains to watch. A U-Haul in my driveway with the ramp down. A dozen boxes stacked on my porch. June asleep in her car seat, still on the lawn. Cody driving a toy truck straight through my flower bed. Ava sitting on the steps, hugging her own backpack to her chest. And my mother's sedan parked across the street, because Rachel had called for backup the moment the key failed in the lock. I got out of my car. Rachel started talking before my door even fully shut. It was temporary, they'd meant to call first, the truck was half price on weekends. Words tumbling out in the exact order panic always delivers them. Mark, to his credit, had already stopped carrying boxes and just stood there with his empty hands, a man visibly wishing to be anywhere else on the entire planet. I walked up my own front path and said, not loud, "You need to load those boxes back on the truck." My mother crossed the street toward me, saying we would all discuss it inside, moving toward my porch like the matter had already been settled somewhere I hadn't been invited to. And that's the exact moment it happened. The sentence left me before I'd even planned to say it. "You need to leave my property." My property. To my own mother. In front of my niece. The words landed on that lawn like a dropped dish, and everything simply stopped. Even Cody's truck noises stopped. My mother went white, then very still. Then she pulled herself back up and gave me, in front of the children and the boxes and Mrs. Alvarez's completely unapologetic front window, one more recital of the family creed. "What's yours is the family's, Diana. That's what family means." I stood on the step my own father had fixed with his own hands, and I heard myself answer, "Then I guess I'm not family today." They loaded the boxes back onto the truck. It took 40 minutes, and I watched every single one of them, arms folded, dying quietly inside and refusing to let it show on my face. The U-Haul pulled away at 4:15. By 6 o'clock that evening, I was reportedly a monster in 4 different family group chats I was no longer even a member of. The silence afterward had a real temperature to it, and it lasted for weeks. No Sunday dinner summons, which I fully expected. But also no more photos of the kids in the family chat. Someone had quietly, deliberately removed me. Cody's birthday came and went in early August. I found out about the party from a bakery cashier who simply assumed I'd been there. That particular one I carried around for days like a splinter I couldn't quite dig back out. My mother told her circle I had chosen a house over her grandchildren, and the phrasing traveled the way her phrasings always do, smooth, self-contained, unfalsifiable. Then, on a random Tuesday night, my phone rang, and the screen read Nana Ruth. My grandmother is 85 and does not, as a rule, call people directly. She summons them through intermediaries, like royalty. I answered, fully bracing for the final boss of the entire guilt campaign. Instead, my grandmother said, "I hear you told Carol no." I braced harder. And she said, "Huh." A long, genuinely interested huh, like a woman tasting something completely new for the first time. And then she told me a story I had never once heard in my entire life. When my mother was 19, she got into nursing school. There was an acceptance letter. It sat on the kitchen table on Nana's farm for 3 days, propped up against the salt shaker. That same week, my great-grandfather lost his job at the mill, and there were 3 boys still at home who needed feeding, and Carol was the oldest. And the letter simply disappeared off that table one day, and nobody ever spoke of it again. "Your mother cried in my kitchen one night," Nana said. And then she never mentioned it again. I let her not mention it. That was my mistake, child. Not hers. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I asked what I should do, and my grandmother, being Nana, declined entirely to answer. "Come to my birthday," was all she said. "Whatever you decide, decide it standing up." I need to show you the worst hour of this entire story, and it doesn't have a single moment of yelling in it. It's just me, my kitchen table, and a laptop, at 2 in the morning, 11 days before my grandmother's birthday. I opened a spreadsheet. Of course I did. Across the top I typed a question I had never once let myself write down before: what would it cost to buy them back? Column A, the money. Paying off my parents' loan meant $85,000. I had what was left of my savings after the down payment. It wasn't enough. Not even close. Getting there meant borrowing against my own retirement account, 6 years of repayments, my entire safety net gone at 34, stacked directly on top of a brand new mortgage. I typed the numbers in anyway. My cursor sat there blinking at me for a long time. Then I added column B, and I labeled it what it buys. And that's where the whole night got genuinely honest with me. Because I already know this particular family ledger. I've been keeping it since I was 12 years old. Empty the shoebox, receive the warm smile. The smile lasts exactly until the next water heater breaks. Pay off their loan, and I wouldn't actually be buying my family back. I'd be renewing my lease with them, same terms, just a much bigger monthly payment. In the last cell of column B, at 2:40 in the morning, I typed a single word, rent. I looked at that word until my eyes actually burned. Then I closed the laptop without saving, which for me is practically an act of arson, and went to bed. Let me stop and ask you something honestly, one person to another. Have you ever sat at a kitchen table in the middle of the night, doing the math on buying back your own family? If that's you, put it in the comments below, not for me, but for the next person scrolling at 2 in the morning who thinks she's the selfish one in her own story. She isn't. And neither were you. The answer, when it finally came, didn't come from any spreadsheet. It came from a door frame. That same weekend, I was clearing out the hall closet, doing the kind of slow-moving in work that takes months instead of days. When I pulled up the old shelf liner, I found something on the closet door frame the previous owners had painted carefully around instead of over. Pencil marks, little horizontal dashes climbing the wood, each one dated, each one labeled in a parent's careful handwriting. Emmy, age 6. Emmy, age 8. A second column, lower down, Ben, age 4. 20 years of some other family's ordinary Tuesdays, climbing quietly up a door frame in a house that now, legally and completely, belonged to me. I sat down on the closet floor and looked at those marks for a long time. This is what a house actually is, I thought. Not square footage. Not an asset with bedrooms to be assigned by committee before the owner is ever consulted. A house is the wall you measure your own years against. Nobody had ever once asked me what I was measuring mine against. And sitting there, I finally understood what I actually wanted to say to my family. And it wasn't just no. No was true, but it was only ever half of me. The other half, the accountant, the aunt who quietly buys school supplies every August, the woman who understands, she needed a voice too, or I'd walk out of that birthday party having amputated something in myself instead of having actually grown it. What I wanted to say was, not like this. Ask me, and watch what I'll do. Take me hostage, and watch the door instead. So I got up off that closet floor and found a good folder, the leather kind, and I started building exactly what I was going to bring to my grandmother's table. It took me 9 days, 2 phone calls I was genuinely scared to make, and 1 checkbook. The invitation to Nana Ruth's 85th birthday dinner arrived by actual mail, because my grandmother firmly believes group texts are strictly for hostage negotiations. Cream card stock, her spidery cursive, dinner at her house, the last Saturday of August. An hour after that card arrived, I later confirmed I was the only one who received it in the mail. I got a follow-up text from my mother, the first direct words she'd sent me since standing on that lawn. Come ready to be part of this family again. I read that sentence maybe 50 times, and I want to give my mother real credit here, because it's a masterpiece of a sentence. 8 decades of a family's diplomacy compressed into a single line that offers you everything and never once names the actual price. Come ready to surrender. Come ready to sign. The door is open, and the toll is simply everything you already said no to a year ago. Honestly, 4 months earlier, that sentence would have worked on me completely. That's the thing about being the girl who understands, you can be managed with almost nothing at all. A cold text. A warm smile. A vague promise that the temperature might someday change. But I had spent an entire summer learning the difference between being loved and being leased. So I ironed my green dress. I confirmed with Nana by mail, like a civilized person. And the night before the party, I sat at my kitchen table and went through my folder one final time, every page, every number, the check paper clipped exactly where I'd see it first. I slept better that night than I had any right to. My mother had planned a birthday dinner. What she'd actually built, without meaning to, was a stage with my seat marked and the audience preloaded. Fine. I'd learned quite a lot about stages over that particular summer, watching her work them. The calmest person in any room owns that room. And nobody in my family had ever once seen me be exactly as calm as I was about to be. My grandmother's dining room holds a table long enough to seat 20, under a lace cloth that has genuinely survived 4 wars in this family's history. That Saturday, it was completely full. My parents. The Doyles. Aunt Sharon and her husband. 2 great-aunts. The church ladies. Cousins I normally only see at funerals. Place cards, which Nana never uses for anything, in my mother's unmistakable handwriting on every single one. My seat was between Aunt Sharon and the deafest of the great-aunts, surrounded, in the very polite way I'd come to expect. I ate. I passed the rolls. I complimented the ham like everyone else at that table. And I watched my mother run the room the way a conductor runs an orchestra, while I kept the folder in my bag, under my chair, and waited. We sang. Nana blew out her candles with June on her lap, and it was, I'll admit, almost lovely. Then, while the coffee was being poured, my mother stood and tapped her glass gently with a spoon. She thanked everyone for coming. She said how much family meant, tonight of all nights. And then she turned to me, warm as a heat lamp, and said, "And we're so glad Diana is here, because we're hoping tonight she'll finally give this family her answer. Rachel and the children need a home, sweetheart. So, is it going to be your sister, or is it going to be that house?" Silence, with China in it. 20 faces turned to me like a jury that had carpooled over together. Ava stopped mid-bite and looked first at her mother, then at me. Somebody's spoon clinked, embarrassed, against a saucer. My mother stayed standing, gracious and absolutely terrible, holding the entire room she'd built and offering me, in front of all of it, her famous 2 doors, surrender, or exile. I put my napkin down on the table and stood up, because Nana Ruth had told me to decide this standing. "Okay," I said. "Let's answer it properly." I didn't raise my voice. If anything, I lowered it. I gave that room my accountant voice, my year-end review voice, the tone I reserve for clients whose numbers have quietly stopped agreeing with the story they've been telling themselves. Before I answer, I said, I want to make sure we're all actually answering the same question. So let me say the whole thing out loud, one time. And I did. The plan, discussed since before Christmas, at tables I was never invited to, for where my sister's family would live in a house I hadn't even bought yet. The 4-bedroom on Maple Street I'd been steered toward for months, like a cow steered toward a chute. My spare key, which left my own kitchen inside someone's pocket in May. The moving truck that met my new locks in July. And the loan. I said it plainly, without cruelty, because Frank Thornton's daughter owed him at least that much. 2 years ago, Mom and Dad borrowed $85,000 against Warner Avenue, trying to save Mark's business. It didn't work. The payment is eating their retirement alive. That's the engine underneath all of this. That's why it had to be me. The room did not gasp. Look around any family table closely enough, and when the truth finally sits down at it, nobody's actually shocked. The aunts studied their coffee cups. Mark stared at his own hands. My mother's chin came up, and her voice, for the first time in my 34 years of studying it closely, went loud. Cracked loud. "You have no right." "Mom," I said gently, "Rachel needs 4 walls. What you've been asking me for, all year, is to be the walls." I let that sit in the room for a moment. Then I reached under my chair and lifted the folder onto the lace tablecloth. But I didn't come here tonight to say no. I came to show you what yes looks like, when somebody actually asks me first. I opened the folder and took out 3 things, and I walked them down the length of that table like I was dealing the final hand of the night. The first was a check. Rachel. Mark. There's a 3-bedroom apartment on Delmar Court, 11 minutes from Ava's school. I toured it Tuesday. The manager is holding it until the first of the month. I set the check in front of my sister. That's first and last month's rent. It's made out to the property company, not to you, not to Mom, to the landlord. It's a home. It has your names on the lease, and nobody's name on the favor. Rachel looked down at the check, and her mouth folded in on itself. Mark put one hand flat on the table, like a man steadying a boat under him. The second thing was a stack of paper, binder clipped together. I set it in front of my father. Dad. That's a full restructure package for the loan. Longer term, lower monthly payment, numbers that actually fit a pension. I ran it 4 different ways. The math holds. You keep Warner Avenue. You don't sell a single thing. I'll prepare the whole application myself and sit with you at the bank. No charge, obviously. I'm your daughter. I'm also, as it happens, the best accountant you know. My father put 2 fingers gently on top of that binder clip, like it was a bird that might startle and fly. And the third thing, I carried the full length of the table, and sat down in front of my mother. A single blank sheet of paper. She stared at it. What is this? That's the page, I said, where somebody, for once, asks me what I want. It's been blank for 22 years, Mom. I keep waiting. Her hands were shaking. The room was so still I could actually hear the kitchen clock ticking from 2 rooms away. One condition covers all of it, I said. My house is not on this table. It never will be again. And my mother, because she is exactly who her own life made her, stood up and played the very last card left in her hand. If you walk out that door, Diana, don't you dare. Love you have to keep paying for isn't love, Mom. I picked up my coat off the back of the chair. It's rent. I've paid 22 years of it. I'm done renting. And into that silence came my grandmother's voice, old and dry as the lace on her own table. Let her go, Carol. You, of all people, know exactly what it costs to stay. I kissed Nana on the top of her head on my way out. Happy birthday. I walked out through the front door, genuinely not knowing whether anything I'd left on that table would still be there in the morning, or whether I had just traded my entire family for a door frame with some stranger's pencil marks on it. The chimes on Nana's front door rang out behind me, and nobody followed. I stood alone on the dark porch and let both of those facts be true at the exact same time. I cried the whole drive home, and I want to be precise about why, because it wasn't regret. Somewhere on Route 4, between my grandmother's porch light and my own, I finally saw the full shape of the entire thing. The shoebox. The smile. 22 years. I had spent my life confusing being needed with being loved, and you can run a surprisingly long way on that particular fuel. Ask my mother, she ran 44 years on it, all the way back to a farm kitchen where a nursing school acceptance letter quietly disappeared off a table. She and I had been paying installments on the exact same debt our entire lives. She just never got to see the actual loan documents. Tonight, I had finally walked straight out of the bank. I pulled onto Lehman Street a little after 10. My porch light was on. I'd left it on for myself, which suddenly felt like the entire point of everything that had happened that year. I sat in the driveway for a minute, just looking at the little house I'd been called selfish all summer long for loving. 2 bedrooms. A crooked step my father had made straight with his own 2 hands. A blue ceramic dish with absolutely nothing in it. And it occurred to me, turning the new key in my new lock, that this was the very first night of my entire life when nobody on earth knew exactly where I was except me. No chart. No committee. No assignment. It felt like grief, and it felt like mine, and I was still learning, right there on that porch step, that those 2 things can be exactly the same feeling. For 3 days, my family went completely silent. On the fourth day, my phone lit up with the name I expected least of anyone. Mark, my brother-in-law, a man who had rarely spoken an unnecessary sentence to me in 9 years, and whose pride had been sleeping on his in-laws' fold-out couch for a year and a half. His text came through on a Wednesday morning, and I still have it saved. Rachel dropped your check at the landlord's this morning. We got the apartment. The kids saw their rooms. Ava picked the one with the window seat. I'm sorry about your porch. Thank you. I sat at my desk and read that message until the letters actually blurred. The proudest man in the entire family had been the very first one through the door I'd built for them. And that, friends, is exactly how I finally learned the difference between people who need help and people who need you specifically, personally, indefinitely. The ones who genuinely need help will take it with both hands, even when it doesn't arrive wrapped in surrender. A week later, Rachel texted like nothing had ever happened at all, which, honestly, is just Rachel. Still on for school pickup Tuesdays? No capital letters. No apology. A bridge made entirely out of logistics. I took it. Bridges don't have to be pretty to hold weight. My father came by that following Sunday and fixed my gate latch, which wasn't actually broken, and drank exactly 1 cup of coffee sitting on my step. The bank took the application, he said. That was his entire speech. The restructure went through in October. The payment fits the pension now, and Warner Avenue isn't going anywhere. Nobody thanked me publicly. There was no group text. My mother's name stayed silent in my phone all through the fall. Almost all fall. It's November now. Saturday mornings, once a month, there are pancakes at my house. Ava, Cody, and June, flour absolutely everywhere, and a new column of pencil marks starting up my closet door frame right beside Emmy's and Ben's. Ava, age 8, measured and dated, in my own handwriting this time. She stands against that frame like she's being knighted for it. My birthday came 2 weeks ago. In the mail, between a utility bill and a furnace tune-up flyer, sat one cream-colored card, my mother's handwriting on the envelope. Inside, a printed verse, and underneath it, no note at all, just Mom. I stood at the counter and held it for a while. The aunts still tell their version of this whole story at church. I've stopped auditing it. Some ledgers you close, not because they finally balance, but because you're simply done carrying them around. And last Sunday, Nana Ruth came for pancakes, summoned entirely by herself, arriving the way she always does, like weather. She inspected the whole house with her cane and pronounced the window seat sensible, which, from Nana, is the equivalent of a standing ovation. Before she left, I did the thing I'd been quietly planning for a full month. I took her hand and pressed a key into it, brand new, cut that Thursday, shiny as a fresh dime. Then I dropped it, where she could watch me do it, into the blue ceramic dish by the toaster, where anyone standing in my kitchen can plainly see it. Given is different from taken, Nana. My grandmother looked at that dish, and then at me, and nodded once, like a judge delivering a verdict. 22 years, child, she said. Some locks take longer. Here's what I know now, and I'll keep it short, because I've learned the short version is usually the true one. Family isn't the people who are allowed to take from you without asking first. Family is the people who knock, even when they already have a key. That's my story. 1 house. 1 stolen key. 1 check with a landlord's name on it instead of mine. If this reminded you that no is a complete sentence, even at your own mother's table, take that as your sign tonight. Share this video with someone who's still quietly paying rent on love that was never actually free. And drop a comment with your own story below. I read every single one of them, every time. Hit subscribe to Behind the Closed Door Revenge so you don't miss what's coming next week, and I'll see you behind the next closed door.